Let's move on to another story. You recently wrote for TruthOut about how the recent Obama administration reforms for immigrant jails are clearly not good enough. Tell us all about it.
Yeah, well, actually, a number of things have happened since I wrote that report.
Yeah.
And it looks like potentially good news is on the horizon. Very recently, on Friday, actually, a very important case was ruled on. It's called the Flora settlement case. And basically, a district judge out there in California ruled that the Obama administration failed to meet the settlement requirements laid out in this 1997 case. And what this 1997 case did is it kind of set the minimum requirements whereby children and families, immigrants, so migrant children and families, can be detained. So this is an older case, and it basically laid out that, basically you can't detain families indefinitely the way that the Obama administration has been. And it kind of said that if children can be released to a guardian or a relative, they should be. And all of these kinds of parameters it laid out. It said that you can't detain children at a non-state licensed child care facility. And why this matters is basically since the summer of 2014, when we saw this huge influx of migrant refugees, essentially many of these folks are refugee families coming up from Central America, from the 3 countries that are facing incredible rates of violence and poverty, and a lot of the results of really our own trade policies. When you look at NAFTA, we saw this crackdown by the Obama administration, which used a couple of detention facilities or prisons in South Texas to house what are essentially, mothers and children. And a lot of these, especially these 2 facilities in Texas have been described as internment camps. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to be able to say that. I mean, when you look at it, there's just the conditions inside are deplorable. We're talking about lack of medical care. There was, these facilities have been coming under increasing pressure. Hunger strikes have happened, really high-profile hunger strikes, which I covered, and as well as in the run-up, this month you had some really high-profile congressional visits to these facilities, and some Democratic lawmakers, calling for these sites to be shut down. On the heels of this, you have this Flora settlement, and really what it's looking like is that this ruling in this settlement could kind of become the death knell to the Obama administration's family detention policy. It basically, the government could appeal. So what this ruling is saying is you either need to shut these sites down, or you need to appeal and give us a reason why you should be exempt from the rules that we laid out in this settlement in 1997. And so maybe, I could see the government appealing, but at the same time, with the amount of scrutiny that has been placed on these sites, there's been a lot of media attention on them. There's been repeated attempted suicides. There's been these child care workers kind of blowing the whistle on what they've seen inside, talking about children losing weight, their hair falling out. I mean, nightmare, tragic stuff on the inside of these facilities. I mean, I think that it would be wise for the Obama administration to just accept that this is the fate of this policy. It's got to be shut down. But at the same time, I think it's interesting for the Obama administration. I think a lot of people think that Obama has been good on immigration, trying to push through his executive actions to limit deportations. But at the same time, it's his administration that's using this sort of ramped up detention policy where they're basically, interning moms and kids in these camps in South Texas. And so, yeah, it's an interesting conundrum, and we can only hope that the Obama administration will not appeal this case and will just kind of accept the fate that accept the writing on the wall when it comes to family detention.
Yeah, it's funny and tragic watching, them trying to do good in some executive orders, but then how unbelievably just shameful and horrible they are when it comes to this type of prisons. Again, the Obama administration has deported more people than any other administration. And again, we're talking specifically about these for-profit prisons by the Geo Group that are down there. In the article, because we went up, you talked about the conditions there, but you actually go into detail with a woman who was there who fled from Brazil, and her story is just like heartbreaking. And actually talking to someone who actually went through this whole thing and is in this horrible prison. Tell us about the woman you detailed in the story.
Yeah, her name is Pollyanne Oliveira. I probably didn't pronounce her name right. Actually, she has a few other names in there. She's got a really beautiful full name. I can't pronounce it, but she fled from Brazil. She faced rape. She went to work on a farm there, and the farmer started to rape and exploit her, and she was forced to flee. And she did flee, and she, like many, her story is sadly not unique for the women who have been held, some of them going on 10 months, 11 months now in these detention centers. She gets to the border and she hands herself over. She's not, trying to sneak in. She gives herself up to the authorities because she's trying to seek asylum. She gets in and she's detained with her child, and it's just a nightmare upon a nightmare scenario. She's one of the 3 women who, ICE kind of arbitrarily designated these 3 women as the ringleaders of a hunger strike that took place back in April at the Carnes facility. And she was isolated in a medical unit with her child that was kept dark and frigid. And, they say, if you ask ICE, are you isolating these, these folks in there? What they will say is that we don't actually have solitary confinement units, is what they'll tell you. But what is really happening is that they're using the medical units. And so they can get around this by saying, they're in a medical unit, we're monitoring their health, basically. But, she was threatened repeatedly with separation from her child and deportation throughout her hunger striking activity. But recently she was released as part of these reforms. They've started releasing hundreds of folks now, especially after the Flores settlement has come down. But basically she is still facing deportation, rather. She lives in Boston with her husband, and what they have told me is that they are planning on visiting local lawmakers in Boston and sharing Pollyanne's story, her harrowing story of fleeing this rapist farmer in Brazil, coming here, being detained, fighting for her rights in a hunger strike, all of the retaliation she faced from ICE. She's finally let out, and she could still be deported back to Brazil, where she certainly faces threats of imminent violence and rape and death. She fears going back there that she will be killed and she could still be deported. She's also joining in a delegation with other refugee women who have since been released from Carnes, and they're all planning on going to Washington, D.C. and kind of testifying before lawmakers there about what they've gone through. But she's going through an appeals process right now in terms of her immigration case. And what what her husband, I've been speaking to her husband, what he told me is that she has been, she was almost put on an ankle monitoring, but by some mishap, the paperwork didn't go through. But I wanted to highlight the ankle monitors because I think it's important to realize that even though a lot of these folks are getting out now, many of them are going to be subject to this kind of ankle monitoring, this electronic monitoring. And I think that this is a dangerous kind of thing, precedent, especially for, again, what are a lot of refugees who are seeking asylum, who are going through the proper court procedures to seek asylum. But also, I think that ankle monitors are dangerous and that we're kind of expanding prison beyond prison walls, and we're bringing it outside, and people, become prisoners in their own homes when they are subject to these ankle monitors. And so a lot of, immigrant detainees who are being released are now being put on this kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, her story, Pollyanna's story, is by no means unique for the women who have been detained for these incredibly long amounts of time with their children. The Women's Refugee Commission actually says that like 60% of the families who are coming up from Central America have valid asylum claims. So the clear majority of these folks have, a lot of them have passed through the typical stages in the immigration court cases to seek asylum. The critical step being they establish whether or not they have credible fear. Pollyanna did have this. Many of them, a lot of the hunger striking women were found to have this, and yet still, are still facing deportation. So it's a broken immigration / asylum system.
Yeah. And actually, before I let you go, let's just spend a minute on this because it's one other important thing that you detail in your report for TruthOut. And that is actually the price of bonds that these immigrants are having. It is so absurd because clearly you have people who are fleeing over the border and they clearly do not have money, for the most part, and the obscene amount that these women have when it comes to the bonds that are placed on them it's infuriating. Just talk a little bit about that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the things is this is happening. It's like all you have to do is talk to the people who, the pro bono attorneys who are working on this stuff. The Obama administration announces, we're not going to detain these folks for so long, and we're going to set, quote, reasonable bonds, and we're kind of walking back this policy now because we're under so much scrutiny. But if you talk to the people that are actually doing the kind of, casework and assisting these women, they'll tell you that in no way, shape, or form are these bonds reasonable for the people who have no money. If they've survived the trip coming here, they have exhausted, all of their monetary, they probably saved everything they could just to get here. They have nothing. And basically the ICE has been setting $10,000, $10,000 bonds. Lowest has been like $8,500 for, I think that's what Pollyanna had.
Right.
And her husband said, if they didn't have the support of a bunch of their friends, they have a wide community support of folks that all kind of chipped in and raised up this money. Another advocate with a group that does pro bono work, they basically been telling me that people have been selling cars to try to make these bonds. All of this kind of thing, just anything they can, just to try. And Raices is this organization doing this pro bono work. They have been really instrumental in being able to help and provide some monetary support for some of these women, these incredibly high bonds. But if they didn't have that, there's no way that they would be able to pay these high amounts to get out. Especially, and it's been driving some, high bond amounts have contributed to some attempted suicides inside. One woman who found out, that she had been given this incredibly high bond amount, couldn't pay it, fell into a deep depression. And, this is literally life or death issues when you're being detained in these kind of prison camps in South Texas. And yeah, I mean, it just goes to show that it's just kind of words. They just kind of say these things, and there's not real reform behind it. They only really put real reforms in place if they've been compelled to by a court. It takes court action for ICE to actually release families. And barring sort of being compelled to by a court, you know, they can all day put out these press releases that says they're going to go easier on these families, but it doesn't amount to, you know, the reality of the situation on the ground is much different.